February 1975. It's past midnight at the Esquire Diner on Cross Bay Boulevard in Ozone Park, Queens, New York. Albert Gelb, a 24-year-old court officer, arrives after his shift with neighbor Lynn Barinello. Sitting in a diner booth is three men, one being Peter Zuccaro, who at 19 already had ties to the Bonanno crime family. A man just short of his 30th birthday walks in the door. He's returning from his friend's wedding, a Lucchese crime family associate by the name of Tommy DeSimone. The man owned a junkyard on Fountain Avenue in East New York, Brooklyn, with his brother and mother. Zuccaro would take stolen cars to this junkyard and have them chopped up for parts, or tagged. The sharp-dressed man notices Zuccaro and his buddies at the booth and leans over the table to say hello and talk about his night. Zuccaro whispered to the man as he leaned over, "Hide the guns, man. Your guns are showing." He fixes up his posture and heads toward the downstairs bathroom. As he breezes past the table of Lynn Barinello and Albert Gelb, Lynn gets a glimpse of the guns that are in the man's waist. "Albert, did you see that guy? He had guns in his waistband." Getting a brief glimpse, Albert decides he's going to follow the man to the downstairs bathroom of the Esquire Diner and confront him, in order to see if he's in lawful possession of the weapons. "Hey, buddy, you got a tin?" Tin meaning a police badge. The man looks at Gelb bewildered. Psst. He must have thought, who the hell does this guy think he is? Gelb instructed the man to get against the wall, and soon a struggle would ensue. "Help! Help!" The screams came from downstairs. Gelb's neighbor, Lynn Barinello, knew something was wrong and immediately called the cops. Zuccaro made his way downstairs and assaulted Gelb, and the man broke free. He handed the guns to Zuccaro and his crew, and they placed him in the car outside. The cops would arrive, and Gelb told his fellow lawman what transpired. "Arrest this man," he told them, and they did just that. Zuccaro and his buddies were able to leave, but their car was going into evidence. Gelb's neighbor, Barinello, told the officers that she spotted them stashing the guns. The man would be charged with criminal possession of a weapon and resisting arrest. Gelb would end up getting credit for the arrest, and that night, back at the precinct, his neighbor expressed regret that the situation happened. Maybe she should have stayed quiet. Gelb attempted to talk to the arrested man to no avail. He returned upset and said to Barinello, "He told me I was a dead man." Barinello smirked. "Maybe he's just angry, Albert. He's just blowing off steam." But there would be no simmering this situation. Shortly after, the OCCB showed up, the Organized Crime Control Bureau. The man that strolled into the diner that night, strapped up with two guns around his waist, went by the name Charles Carneglia. Charles Carneglia, a.k.a. Charlie Carniggs, was born 1946 in Queens, New York. His brother John Carneglia, a.k.a. Johnny Carniggs, the year before, in 1945. The children of William and Jenny Carneglia grew up in the Ozone Park section of Queens. This area borders East New York, Brooklyn, and neighborhoods like Woodhaven and Howard Beach, Queens, surround it. All areas historically rich in mafia activity. By the mid-1960s, Charles was on his way to racking up numerous arrests: petty larceny, receiving of stolen goods, theft of interstate shipment, possession of stolen property, and conspiracy, eventually being sentenced to a year for grand larceny. John Carneglia was also on his way to forging a criminal career, and both of their future exploits would be cemented into the Hall of Fame of New York City criminal history. By the early 1970s, both brothers were running with the Fulton Rockaway Boys. Brothers like John and Gene Gotti, and their best friend, Angelo Quack Quack Ruggiero. They were becoming associates of the Gambino crime family, under the tutelage of Carmine and Daniel Fatico, two powerful Brooklynite mobsters who relocated their operations to Ozone Park, operating out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. The Carneglia brothers owned a junkyard with their mother Jenny on Fountain Avenue in East New York, Brooklyn. This place would become a haven for chopping up and tagging cars, and close by, just a couple of blocks away, a property on Pine Street, a site referred to as the Barn, which is where the Carneglia brothers kept bales of marijuana for their drug operations, and a place where Charles would experiment in the disposal of human remains. While these two brothers shared their love of crime, they seemingly held different lifestyles. John would become a family man, even taking in a homeless 12-year-old Irish kid by the name of Kevin Mcmahon, whom he found sleeping in his pool house one morning. He'd make it big in the drug trade with Gene Gotti and bring in serious money running rackets for the Gambinos. And like any mobster who had a name for himself in the area, hijacking trucks out of JFK was a necessary art, first being arrested in 1970 for theft of interstate commerce. The case would ultimately be dismissed in 1971. He was smart, witty, and his business acumen allowed him to rise quickly. He didn't smoke, do drugs, or drink much, and he had a reputation of being a gentleman, but he was also a killer, famously putting 6 bullets into Paul Castellano on December 16, 1985, outside the Spark Steakhouse, then walking around the car and finishing off underboss Thomas Bilotti, after Bilotti was already hit by Salvatore Scala and Eddie Lino. In May of 1981, Philip Giacone, Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato, and Dominic Trinchera of the Bonanno crime family are killed by fellow Bonanno mobsters after trying to plan a coup against Bonanno boss Phil Rastelli. Powerful Bonanno mobster and future boss Joe Messino was very close with John Gotti and crew. Messina was able to arrange for the 3 capos' bodies to be dropped off at the Hole, a low-lying, disarrayed area of the Queens-Brooklyn border, which also served as a Gambino graveyard. John Carneglia assisted in burying the bodies of the 3 capos. Sonny Red was found within weeks. The other 2 capos wouldn't be uncovered until 23 years later. March 18, 1980. 12-year-old Frank Gotti, son of John Gotti, is killed while riding his motorbike in front of his home. Gotti's neighbor John Favara struck the child with a car. Ultimately, the death was ruled accidental. July 28th, John Favara goes missing. Law enforcement maintained that John Carneglia was involved in the shooting death of Favara. In 2009, Kevin Mcmahon, the Howard Beach native who became a member of the Carneglia family when he was 12, was testifying in court. He stated that after Favara was killed, the body was brought to John's brother, Charles Carneglia's House of Horrors on Pine Street, aka the Barn, just a couple of blocks away from the Fountain Avenue Junkyard. According to Kevin, Favara's body was dissolved in a drum full of acid. It took a while at first, Kevin would state, and Charles was taking a lot of flack from the crew. Ultimately, Favara would be dissolved, and according to McMahon, Charles Carneglia brought one of his finger bones to the diner and tossed it in Angelo Ruggiero's soup bowl. The barn was a spooky place, and the basement was said to be the place where Charles would dissolve bodies and, in true serial killer fashion, hang up jewelry and other mementos of the victims. Like his brother John, Charles Carneglia's reputation was that of a tough guy, not to be messed with. However, it would be his personal traits that would set them apart. Charles had a serious temper and seemed very unforgiving in his actions. He did drugs. He's been cited as being a bad drunk who would often talk about his murderous exploits when he was on one of his alcoholic benders. He wasn't the big moneymaker that John was either. He spent much of his life bouncing around from pad to pad and maintaining a messy bedroom at his mother Jenny's house. He would go into fits of extreme paranoia if he thought the law was after him. He would board up his windows at his apartment so no one could see in. He would put pepper around his vehicle in order to thwart any dogs that might be sniffing around. He was a stone-cold killer with a bag full of chips on his shoulders. In 1977, he stabbed Gambino associate Michael Cotillo to death outside the Blue Fountain Diner in Queens, New York. In 1983, he stabbed Gambino associate Salvatore Puma to death while involved in a dispute over money. Charles was involved in the murder of Gambino Capo Louis de Bono in October of 1990. He was joined by Bobby Borriello and Kevin McMahon. The murder took place in the parking garage of the World Trade Center in downtown Manhattan. The plot was arranged because John Gotti Sr. felt insulted that Bono was making a lot of money off scams and continually dodging John Sr.'s meetings. Bono, who was known to be obese, had no chance of escape as he was shot 7 times sitting in the front seat of his car. After the hit, Charles Carneglia got his button. He became a made man in the Gambino crime family, years after his brother John, who was sent away a year prior for heroin trafficking. John Carneglia and Gene Gotti would both get 50-year sentences for that. With Kevin Mcmahon's father figure gone, Kevin fell under the behest of Charles Carneglia as he slipped deeper into his involvement in murderous activity. December 1990, the American Airlines parking lot at JFK International Airport. Charles is once again joined by Bobby Borriello and Kevin McMahon. Charles kills an armored truck guard, 47-year-old Jose Delgado Rivera. He shoots Rivera twice with a shotgun, once in the torso and once in the back. They make off with thousands, and the heist made big news. This being one of those instances that Charles retreated to his hideaway apartment, boarded up the windows, and drank his paranoia away for weeks. Then there was Peter Sicaro again. As the 19-year-old aspiring Bonanno gangster who assisted Charles at the Esquire diner in 1975 got older, he would become further affiliated with Charles Carneglia. In 1979, he and Charles were sent to find Carmine Agnello, then boyfriend and future husband of John Gotti's daughter Victoria. Carmine assaulted Victoria, and John Sr. was enraged. They tracked down Agnello and beat him to a pulp, shooting him in the ass and clubbing him. The men didn't go there to kill Agnello, but to send a bloody message. Later on in '86, Sicaro would officially be traded to the Gambinos while incarcerated. And perhaps one of the strangest incidents involving Charles Carneglia was around 1993. Incarcerated John Carneglia's daughter graduated high school, and a party was being held at the Carneglia home in Howard Beach. Gunshots rang out outside the home. This infuriated the family, and after Charles spoke to John on a prison call, the hunt was on. The man was set loose, and nothing would stop him from getting to the bottom of this. He contacts Kevin McMahon and tells him to bring a camcorder to the Fountain Avenue Junkyard. When Charles arrives, he's inebriated, and he's got 2 young men in his possession. The men exit the car with plastic bags on their head. They are Danny Casera and David D'Arpino. "Who the hell shot outside my brother's house?" Charles would scream as McMahon filmed. "We don't know! We don't know!" The shoes from the young man are removed as Charles reveals a turkey baster loaded with battery acid. He drips the acid over the man's feet. "Ah! Please!" they scream as their feet turn pink and their skin starts to bubble. They use their heels to wipe off the acid, which only makes matters worse. "Take off your pants!" Charles pulls their pants down. "I'm gonna stick this baster right up your ass." "It was Chris! Chris did it!" they screamed. Chris meaning John Carneglia's son, Chris Carneglia. Charles proceeded to wash the young men's feet, and they were let go. No word till this day how John Carneglia's son was dealt with, and supposedly that video was shown around for a while. Now let's go back to 1975, the Albert Gelb incident at the Esquire diner. A court date was set for the following year of 1976. Charles Carneglia had possession of a deadly weapon and resisting arrest charges looming. With this and his criminal record, he'd probably be facing a year or more in the slammer. March 11th, 1976, a few days before Charles's court date, Albert Gelb is now a year older at 25 and still working as a court officer. It's after midnight again, and Albert leaves the downtown Brooklyn courthouse and makes his way to Richmond Hill, a Queens neighborhood just a stone's throw away from the Esquire diner in Ozone Park. Gelb is followed home by David Varshan, who was a fellow court officer, and he and Gelb had just been turned on to the Jehovah Witness faith by his neighbor, Lynn Barinello, who accompanied Gelb to the diner a year earlier. They were said to be on their way to Gelb's house in order to do some studying. Gelb was Jewish, but was taking a liking to his newfound faith. Gelb got a little ahead of Varshan, who ended up being stuck at a light on Atlantic Avenue. Gelb made his turn onto his home on 109th Street. Varshan heard some loud bangs while sitting at the light, but thought nothing of it. He turned onto 109th Street and noticed Gelb's car double parked in front of his home. Varshan made his way to Gelb's car and found Gelb slumped over, bloody and riddled with 7 bullets. Just a few days before that court date, where Gelb would have to face down Gambino crime family associate Charles Carneglia, he was shot dead. The news was all over it, as always when a cop is killed. But this had all the marks of a planned, professional assassination. Gelb's family and friends would mourn, as well as the law enforcement of New York City. One of their own was taken out, a bright young, 25-year-old man who barely started his life journey. A $5,000 reward was put out, and union official Dennis Quirk didn't hold back when he told the media that he figured Charles Carneglia, or someone attached to organized crime, was responsible. News traveled quickly through the Gambino family as well, eventually making its way to the top. Killing a cop isn't exactly the type of heat that the mob is keen on. It's often cited as a rule that cops and their families are off limits. They're doing their job, and the mafia does its best to do theirs. A game of cat and mouse with dire consequences. Nonetheless, do not make the mistake of taking out an officer. Carneglia was lying low and wasn't welcome around the Bergen. In time, 2 jesters from the Gambinos would make their way to those affected by the death of Albert Gelb. According to author Anthony M. DeStefano, while Albert Gelb's family was sitting Shiva, 2 well-dressed men stopped by the home and requested to speak to Albert Gelb's father, Louis. They explained to him that what had happened was a mistake, and in a roundabout way, explained that it was not authorized. If you're not familiar with sitting Shiva, it's a mourning period for Jewish families. Friends and loved ones come over during the week and express condolences and remember the life of those that have departed. Usually food is served, and visitors often bring food for the family. I wasn't brought up heavily influenced by religion myself. However, I remember when my mom passed away and we sat Shiva for a week. We had to cover the mirrors in the house, and we had to cover the windows, which create a reflection if you stare into them. The idea is that your appearance doesn't matter. You're grieving. Worry about your lost loved one, or perhaps your faith in God, not your vanity. I can only wonder that same week Albert Gelb's family was sitting Shiva, if Charles Carneglia was hiding at home in a drunken paranoid stupor with his windows covered. On the second occasion, DeStefano said he interviewed police union official Dennis Quirk years after the Gelb incident, in which Quirk stated that later on in the year of 1976, he was at a function in Staten Island when a powerful lawyer he knew approached him with a stocky Italian guy that he recognized immediately. "I want you to know, that Gelb incident, no boss authorized that." It was Thomas Bellotti, chauffeur and close confidant of newly crowned boss Paul Castellano. While researching the story, I wondered at times why Charles wasn't taken out by the leadership. I imagine it must have been discussed, and I'm sure they had good reason not to act. But think of the heat that must have been felt. It's not like Charles was a made man. Plus, there was another Gambino crew who had an operation out of East New York at that time, and often passed through Fountain Avenue, probably zooming by the Carneglia Junkyard numerous times. I'm sure they would have been more than happy. In 2008, after enjoying years of impunity and chumming it up with the fellow Howard Beach residents around town, Charlie Kniggs is brought down. He's arrested along with dozens of more Gambino mobsters. His brother Johnny Kniggs is already into his 19th year locked up. Charles gets hit with the RICO statute and is charged with 5 murders. Charles arrives at the FBI field office to be processed. Court documents break down the moment when Charles finally inquired about what exactly his charges were. They read him his Miranda rights. "What am I being charged with?" He was advised that he was being charged with RICO. "RICO? Who's RICO?" He was also advised that he was charged with 5 murders and stated, "I'm fucked." "What murders?" He was advised by the detectives that the murder of court officer Albert Gelb. "I don't know him." He was advised that he was charged with the murder of Michael Cotillo at the Blue Fountain Diner. "Never heard of him." He was advised that he was charged with the murder of Sal Puma. Never heard of him. I know a Sammy Puma. He was advised that he was charged with the murder of Jose Delgado Rivera at the airport. Never heard of him. Carneglia was also advised that he was charged with the murder of Louis de Bono at the World Trade Center. I knew Louis. Charles continued. Okay, so you got canaries. They said I killed a court officer. A guy at the Blue Fountain. A Puma. A guy at Kennedy. Louis de Bono. Those canaries are all rats. I have to take this to trial. I need to get out and mount a defense. I could take my lawyer and an investigator and speak to people. I gotta take the stand. Yeah, he'll fight the case all right. But what Charles didn't realize is that there was an all-star cast of witnesses ready to shed light on his 30-year career. Kevin Mcmahon, the Honorable Carneglia family member turned state's witness, he shed light on the de Bono murder, the murder of armored guard Jose Delgado Rivera, the pouring of battery acid on the young teen's feet at the Junkyard, the John Favara disappearance. It would be Kevin who told the world of Charles's body disposal methods at the barn. Peter Sakara would also talk about Charles. He shed light on some of the drug trafficking, the Junkyard activities, and solidified Kevin McMahon's story about Charles kidnapping the teens and pouring battery acid on their feet. He also talked about the mementos that Charles kept up on the rafters at the barn, the jewelry and other items from the victims. And another testifier would make his presence known, a Queens-born Albanian with ties to the Gambino family, John Alite. Alite told the court that John Gotti Jr. was originally enlisted to kill Louis de Bono. Alite stated that he tried to track down Louis de Bono, but was unsuccessful. Ultimately, Carneglia, Borriello, and McMahon caught up with him in the parking garage of the World Trade Center. Alite also claimed that Charles Carneglia was a master of disguise. He would grow his beard, shave his beard, dye his hair orange. He liked to look different and not to be stereotyped. Once again, we're hearing about old Charlie Koenig's paranoia. In the end, Charles Carneglia, aka Charlie Koenigs, would be found guilty of 4 murders. The murders of Michael Cotillo, Louis de Bono, Jose Delgado Rivera, and Salvatore Puma. He would not be convicted in the conspiracy to murder Albert Gelb, or anything in connection with the disappearance of John Favara. However, by all accounts, he certainly had a hand in it. Carneglia will be sentenced to life in prison, and he even went as far as requesting the death penalty, which he was not granted. After serving 19 years in federal prison, John Carneglia was released in 2018, as well as Gene Gotti, whom he was sentenced with in 1989. Kevin McMahon, the honorary Carneglia family member, who was taken in at 12 years old, would be sentenced to time served for his cooperation, which amounted to less than 5 years. Peter Sakara spent 12 years in prison for his connection to armored truck robberies, and I'm not sure of his whereabouts today, after he testified against the Carneglias. Before we get to the location today, I just want to talk about some of the research I had to do to find these locations. In the books, or newspaper articles, or anything about the Carneglias, the address is never given as to where their junkyard was on Fountain Avenue. Fortunately, I found an old court document from 1992 where the city attempted to seize the property. It mentioned that the junkyard was at 651 Fountain Avenue. Furthermore, there's no mention of where the Pine Street location was either. A simple search for Carneglia, Pine Street, revealed that Jenny Carneglia, their mother, owned the property at 834 Pine Street. I was able to find these locations and what they looked like at the time using the database at 80s.nyc. 80s.nyc was a collection of photos that New York City took back in the 80s for tax purposes. They surveyed numerous properties, and luckily, I was able to find the photos for these properties, what they looked like at the time. I don't always get lucky with this search, and I'm always crossing my fingers. I'm hoping that these properties will show up. This is one of the occasions where I was able to provide both images of what the area looked like at the time. So without further ado, let's head over to East New York, to the site of the Fountain Avenue Junkyard and the house known as the Barn at 834 Pine Street. right, guys, it's another gloomy day in East New York. I'm heading towards Fountain Avenue, straight ahead, to the former site of the Junkyard, owned by John and Charles Carneglia, as well as their mother, Jenny. Now, the reason why I was able to find the location of this was from an old court document that I found, where back in 1992, the city was attempting to seize the property. Other than that, there's no other way you could find out what the address was to this, because it's not in the books, it's not in any other articles. So I had to find that court document that was there. And that's how that came about. So right now you're looking at 651 Fountain Avenue. This trapezoidal shaped property here, the former site of the Carneglia brothers Junkyard on Fountain Avenue. We're gonna cross over, we're gonna get a better look at it. Then we're gonna head over to Pine Street, another place of significance. Okay, we're gonna cross over now once this traffic stops. Here we go. Crossing over to 651 Fountain Avenue, the Junkyard. Now, I found an article in 2009 which stated that they were trying to turn this into a bus depot. Hold on, let's get a look in. I'm sure there'll be some openings here. So they were trying to turn this into a bus depot. Now, I was under the assumption that back in '92, this property was in fact seized. However, in 2009, when they were trying to turn it into a bus depot, apparently it was the company of HJC Holdings which was trying to do that. And the chief officer of that company being Carneglia's wife. So it's quite possible that they still own this property. And Google image search showed that there was a bunch of buses here. I don't see any buses now. I see another bunch of buses in that lot over there, but nothing here. So maybe it's abandoned right now. Quite possibly the case. Let's look at the main entrance here. $6.51. I'm being watched. Well, so are you. So this was a place that cars were brought. They were chopped up, they were tagged. This was a major operation here. Interesting fact, about a half a mile that way is the Fountain Avenue dump, former site of the Fountain Avenue dump. So I don't know, you can only imagine how many times Roy and the crew over there when the Gemini was coming by this junkyard. I don't know if they did any business here or not, but they would have drove by this place numerous times, and they were both Gambino, so who knows? Who knows? Let's get a look here. Oh, this is good. Come on. There we go. The Carneglia brothers Junkyard. We'll walk around the whole back. We'll do the walk, the trapezoidal walk. All around the whole back here. See the barbed wire. Now we're gonna head over to Pine Street after we take this walk. And I'm kind of trying to change a little bit of popular history here. See, a lot of people maintain the notion, including the Daily News article that I was speaking of before, that on this site was where Charles Carneglia would dissolve bodies in barrels. However, that seems not to be the case based on my research. You see, they owned another property on Pine Street, 834 Pine, which we're gonna go to, which is about a minute walk from here. And Kevin Mcmahon testified, as I mentioned in the audio before this, that on this property was a structure called the barn. And he said that that was where Carneglia once, a few things. He had a body of a junkie in the floorboards, he claimed, for which after he dissolved in a vat of acid in a kind of like a heavy-duty plastic barrel, apparently. And also Peter Zuccaro claimed that he went there to the barn property on Pine Street and that was where he saw the mementos, such as the jewelry and the other items of the victims, hanging up in true serial killer chainsaw massacre style. Also, it was there where Kevin Mcmahon said he had kept barrels in the basement. So I'm coming to the conclusion that it was not at this junkyard. It was at the other property that they owned at 834 Pine Street, which at that time, and I showed in the video and I'll show it again, at that time had the house on 834, and to the right, going on to Stanley Avenue, was a barren field, which was another lot that they had owned. So I'm gonna maintain that that's where that activity happened, contrary to popular belief that everyone says that it was at this junkyard. I don't believe so. Everything tells me that it was not. So, all right, we just about did the full walk around this thing. No dumping, yeah. Well, now, at least. So, we're gonna head over to Pine Street right now, which is gonna be to the left. And we're gonna check it out. So once again, here's the back of the junkyard at 651 Fountain Ave. We're gonna walk over to Pine Street so you can see how close this property was that they owned. Now, how did I find out the exact location of the property they owned? Well, another thing that's not mentioned in books or anything else, other articles, but I had just typed in Carneglia, Pine Street, property records, and I came up with the address, which seems like it was transferred to somebody else sometime in the late 80s. Nonetheless, let's get over. We're gonna head over to the location where the barn was. Where the barn, where I'm maintaining, was the spot where everything took place as far as the dissolving and the murders. I'm not maintaining that, that's what it says in the book. But the history and the common knowledge says that it was at the junkyard. So, here we are already. We're already on Pine Street. You can see the junkyard in the distance. Okay, let's walk. Pine Street, let's go to 834. And I always said I'm not gonna film houses. This one I will. I said I'll make an exception. This time I will. Only because it's not easily searchable. Everything else usually is searchable. You type in a New York Times article, the address is there. Bing, bong, boom, you got it. This one you gotta do a little legwork, so These houses were there at the time in the 80s, as I showed. These properties. All right. So let's do this. Head over to 834 Pine, which is going to be across the street to our left. This is kind of weird. Pretty big yard. All right. Looks like an old building, probably here for many decades. Okay. So right there, that's 834 Pine. Now I showed the picture and I'll show it again now. Right there. Now to the right here, I'll show it again, was all barren fields. It was the lot that they owned. None of these houses were here. None of this was here. This is all newer construction. Once again, we'll look at where the house was, 834. And to the right here was all a field. Fucking wasteland, basically. And that ended, as you see in the old videos from 80s.nyc, that ended on Stanley Ave. And then it went around, wrapped around to the left. And this was the spot where all the accounts from Chalres and Mcmahon were, as far as body disposal. This area was where the barn was, not at the site of the junkyard. Pine Street. Just basically a block away from the big junkyard property. This was where the barn was. This was where the empty lot was. This is where Zuccharo also said they brought in RVs filled with bales of marijuana for their operation. Let's go across the street and get a better look. Okay, so due to my research, I suppose I'm trying to rewrite popular history, popular mafia history, as far as where things happen. All right. So, wrapping back around towards Fountain, there's the back of the junkyard. Former location where the barn was, right up over here, this whole area. I also thought about something. You know, you had Roy DeMeo and those guys, Gemini method. I'm gonna call Charles Carneglia's method of disposing of bodies, I'm gonna refer to that as the barn method. And the barn method is the act of receiving bodies and dissolving them in barrels of acid. Much like Charles Carneglia did. I'm also going to maintain that we don't know how many bodies he did that to. We know the murders he was charged with. And then Mcmahon talked about the junkie's body that he had received on the property and dissolved. He said he dissolved it in a barrel and then poured it out into the sewers over here in East New York. And it stunk up the neighborhood. We don't know how many times Carneglia used the barn method to dispose of bodies. If I had to take a guess, it could possibly be in the dozens. Let's get one more look across the street at 651 Fountain Avenue, the Carneglia brothers junkyard. You know, some people leave comments that I take too long to say things sometimes, or I pause a little bit. I just want you guys to feel the area. It's not really about me, you know? Get a feel of the area. I don't have to talk to keep you entertained, you know what I'm saying? Soak in the atmosphere. But most of the comments have been awesome. You guys are great. I love it. We'll get one more look at the main entrance, and then we'll get the hell out of here. So. .651 Fountain Ave. You guys have a safe week.